Well, to reiterate a little bit what we went over last week and where we're at, we're on the third day. We're going through the book of Genesis, of course, and we're trying to relate science and the Bible and show how they're symbiotic and how they complement each other in everything that we read and everything that we've studied in years past. Just real quickly, we talked about Pangea, verse 9 and 10. The land and water were separated, and the first land that we had, we refer to it as Pangea. Y'all remember that from your school days. It was all one big mass unit of land. During that time, you have to remember that we don't have day and night yet. We don't have seasons yet. We still have continual sunlight until we get into verse 14. The earth is not tilted yet. The tilt is what gives us our season, so we know that it's still not tilted just yet. And the fossils that we see, the tree fossils and plants that we see in the fossil record during this time don't have growth rings, which backs up the fact that we had continual sunlight as well. After the cooling of the earth somewhat, in the latter part of day 3, we start to see plants starting to grow, and the first thing that it's referred to is the tender grass, which we learned was actually meaning things like lichen, moss, algae, things like that that require no dirt. They just grew on the rocks because there was no dirt. There was no erosion, so to speak, right after the land was formed. Yeah, y'all come on in. Hello, Hazy. Right after the land was formed, it was all rock. So the only thing they could grow on was rock, and the only thing that grows on rocks is lichens and moss and such. After some time went by, the next thing that we got into was plants that required just a minimal amount of soil. And we were talking about things such as ferns and mushrooms, which all produce spores, which helps replicate itself. And then eventually, as time went by and erosion was enough, we start seeing bigger plants and got into trees that have seeds. And all of this, not only is it mentioned in the Bible in this order, but that's also the exact same way we see it in the fossil record as well.
Where are we at time-wise now?
Oh, let's see here.
Got a sliding scale on my
4 billion,
Yes,
4
yes,
billion
yes,
years
yes,
went by.
yes.
He's going to make us a timeline.
Yeah, I'm going to make y'all a timeline and give it to you before we're all said and done from the very beginning all the way through humans and what happened day-wise and years-wise and what happened in those periods. I'll do all that and hand it out to you before we all get. Yeah, I'm looking for it. Hang on just a minute. I got lots of numbers here.
I'm beating you to the punch.
I'll get to it here in just a minute.
Okay.
I did want to say that it took, I believe we're at the 360 million year mark. It took 80 million years from the very first plants until we had trees. And this time period was known as the Carboniferous Mississippian period. As geologists, we name the different periods of the fossil groups that we see, and this is known, typically we refer to it as Mississippian. Troy's knows about the Mississippian time. That's when we find a lot of the Mississippi reefs around here that we drill oil and gas for. Huh?
Is that what that means?
That was the Mississippian time period. Pangea not separated into plate tectonics yet, or plates, and y'all are familiar with plate tectonics, how convection from the heat of the earth eventually had its effect on the land mass and the oceans as well, and broke up in different plates, which separates the continents and moved everything around on the earth. You remember that Pangea was all one land mass on the earth, and it couldn't be spinning because if it had it would have thrown the wobble out. You got this big hump on it, it wouldn't have been spinning right, so it was still, and we had continual sunlight. It eventually started breaking up and moving around on the planet. she brought up a couple of weeks ago when she was whipping it up on Google, I guess. It showed Pangea as a long, skinny, vertical landmass. In my geology books and what I was taught, it was more of a horizontal landmass, and we don't know. But it was located on the equator. And as the plate tectonics began to break up, it slowly started to rotate vertically somewhat, and then started to split up. And then we had, you know, the Europe and all this on this side of the earth, and the Americas over here on this side of the earth, which is where we're at today. Well, to do that and to have sunlight on the back side, that's when the spinning started. And we'll get into that in day 4. So after growing vegetation on Earth, about 320 million years ago, we start seeing the first small reptiles in the fossil record.
So there's air now?
There is air. It's very minimal oxygen.
There was air when the light and stuff?
Yes, yes. Not much. I mean, there was air. We had an atmosphere, but it was mostly CO2 and nitrogen. A little bit of oxygen. Once we started having plants, the lichen and then all the way to the trees and stuff like that, as you know from science, they breathe CO2 and put out oxygen. And the same thing was happening in the ocean with all the single cell and multi-cell things that we discussed, how they were producing oxygen as well. And that's pretty much how we got oxygenated the earth, was from the plants and the things that were growing on land and in the water as well. And so now we're to this point, we have land and we have sunlight and we have food. So this is where we start seeing dinosaurs. This is where the dinosaurs came into existence, here in day 3, at the very end of day 3. After things had been established, we had oxygen to breathe, we had food for them to eat, we had land for them to crawl on. So this is where dinosaurs were introduced to the face of the earth. Why don't we see that in the Bible record? Why did God not mention the dinosaurs?
Well, was it part of when he created the animals?
Nope. The animals that we're going to talk about in the coming days, the next couple of days, are not the same animals that we see as dinosaurs.
Because they didn't really exist.
Because it's all a lie.
It's all a lie.
What did y'all hear when you were growing up? What did you hear when you were going to church? What did y'all hear about dinosaurs?
Nothing. I didn't
Did
go
you
to
hear
church.
anything about when they existed, or where they existed, how they came into being?
I heard that God just put the fossils into the ground.
Ah.
He could have. He could. I wouldn't go against it.
Because he knew that we would need oil someday, and so he
Very
put all
good.
these weird animals.
How did dinosaurs get there?
Well, that's what we don't know. The same way, how did the plants get there to start with? How did the land get there to start with? How did sunlight reach us to begin with? You know, we don't have the answers to all of that kind of stuff, and that was a big question of mine in the beginning, was, well, how did they get here? I mean, where did that start? You know, some things that you read and such will have you believe that everything came from a single cell amoeba, and that we all developed our different ways, and the animals did this, and the humans did this, and the fish did this. And I don't believe that's the way it happened. I think God actually set that on earth the same way that he made man, you know, and I just don't think that we all developed through the years from like that through chance, which is essentially what atheists believe for sure.
Is that what evolutionists believe, single cell?
Yes, that everything came from a beginning of single cell and
Is that
development.
what was taught in your classes?
No, but and I don't know. I mean, they touched on it a little bit, but I went to Christian university, so they didn't really pound that evolution thing too much. But they also didn't pound the Bible thing either very much. It was more of a nice mixture of both, I guess, to say. I mean, we were exposed to both, so that you would know, but they didn't. They certainly didn't have the atheistic viewpoint very well. Dinosaurs came into existence about 250 million years ago, and it was towards the very end of the third day, or time period, or span of time, as we've discussed how time goes. Third day, and it lasted about 180 million years. The whole,
It's already broken up.
well, from the beginning of day 3 to the end of day 3 covered about 180 million years. Yes, at the very end of day 3, the planet, the plates had already started moving, and the land started breaking up at this point.
The dinosaurs weren't on Pangea.
Dinosaurs were on
Started on
Pangea in the very beginning. Now, and we're going to get into this a little bit more, but if you're like me, the first thing when somebody says dinosaur, the first thing I think of is T-Rex or Brontosaurus, Stegosaurus, some of those kind of things. And we always think that dinosaurs were all the size of this wall. You know, they're huge, they just stomped around, and, you know, like what we see in Jurassic Park and all that. The truth is that the majority of all dinosaurs were no bigger than your dog. 80 to 90% of all dinosaurs that's ever been found in the fossil record were no bigger than your dog. There was exceptions, of course, of the ones that I just mentioned, and of course they bring excitement, and because we don't see things like that today. We don't.
Now wait, like a standard poodle dog or like a
No,
Chihuahua
like a
dog?
Maggie dog.
Huh? So they weren't tiny like
I believe the
Chihuahua
word that
dogs.
they used when I heard it was German Shepherd. Most of what you saw was the size of a German Shepherd, so to speak.
But just if you think about the cultivation of land and the breaking up of the land, the breaking up of the crust, can you imagine? I mean, we have a big old tractor now that breaks up acres and hectares
Yeah,
of land, right?
yeah.
But if you had Brontosaurus Rex walking all over the earth every so often, he's going to break up some land and he's going to turn over
It did
some
some
dirt,
damage.
and he's going to work some dirt over and over and over. So,
Exactly.
I don't know.
I have a theory why God didn't mention them.
Do what?
I have a theory why God didn't mention them in the Bible.
What is it?
Well,
Let's hear
wasn't it kind of a short span that the dinosaurs were actually
Yes,
here?
it was very short.
Maybe
span.
God decided that it was not good, and he was just like, blip, take those out.
Well,
And we're
Let me get my eraser.
going to discuss it.
is it not in Job where God talks about, I think he calls it a behemoth, or
Behemoth.
is that the term that he uses? And in the language, they describe it as a large lizard, I think is what it is. Is that right?
No,
No, what do they describe it as?
a large mammal.
Large, oh, it's a large mammal?
That's the way
Okay,
I've-
so they're talking about
that's the way I've been
large
doing
mammal. Okay,
And we're going to get into some of that too.
okay.
So let's go, what do we know about dinosaurs? Well, one thing is they were cold-blooded. All of them were cold-blooded creatures. We had an earth that was extremely hot, humid, lacking in oxygen, so to speak. And so they needed that heat and that continual sunlight to move and to live. Because a cold-blooded animal has to have outside warmth to warm their body to get it to move. Otherwise, you don't. You can generate your own heat within your body, but a cold-blooded animal cannot do that. So they were all cold-blooded. Everything had been prepared for their arrival up to this point with massive vegetation that was on Earth. And like I said, in the beginning, certainly in Pangea, and probably for the most of the dinosaur life, or where the dinosaurs lived, was along the land that was at the equator on Earth, because that's the hottest point and where they would have lived. If they had gone further north or south, on the edges of that, it would have probably been too cold and not have as much vegetation and stuff for them to eat. Most of the dinosaurs were vegetarians. There was meat eaters, and the meat eaters really came in more so towards the end, and I think it was a population control thing probably that, in that speculation, that God did to control the population where dinosaurs started eating each other. There was a few of those towards the very end to control things.
Were those across did God put those meat eaters on there, or were they a crossbred between plant eaters?
You know, that's a good question. I don't know that.
God just put them there like he did the first dinosaur?
I just don't even know if I have an answer for that, you know? We know that the plant eaters were here first, and then at the very end, the meat eaters came. I don't know if it was an evolution thing, the way God created that. for them to begin eating meat, or if he just like set them in place, you know. Good question to ask when we get there, talk to the big dog. We talked about how there are no bigger dogs. There was very few, towards the very end, I do want to mention this, we find in the fossil record that there were very few mammals. Now this is, don't get confused when I tell you this, because we don't get into the production of mammals, so to speak, until later, like on day 5. But there were a few mammals at this point, but they were small, burrowing animals like rats, moles, little bitty tiny hairy things at this point. They really didn't have, really were nothing more than just food for the dinosaurs, so to speak. But they were burrowing animals. They didn't live out in the wild, and they didn't run amok like deer and stuff like that. Just small little tiny rodents, I guess, so to speak, at this point. So what was the reason for the existence of the dinosaurs? What would you think?
Because kids love them.
Amen.
I think we love them because we don't know that much about them, or we haven't really been taught that much about them. Really and truly, when you step back and you look at the whole creation picture of how God put everything in place, separated the water, did the atmosphere, and he made the land, and started introducing us. What did the dinosaurs bring to the table? What was the reason for them to even come to Earth to begin with? And why is it not addressed so much in the Bible? Well, it's just exactly what Shannon said. He nailed it.
car.
The dinosaurs were the carbon source that we needed on planet Earth. What does carbon do? You cannot have heat, you cannot start a fire without carbon. Carbon is the center thing that burns. And I told you early on that every living thing has carbon-14 in it. You cannot escape it. Everything, plants, animals, everything has carbon-14 in it. And that's where the carbon comes from, so everything that's organic. So why do we need that? Well, it was God laying the groundwork for humans. Again, everything that's happening as we go along here is all in preparation for us. It's all in preparation for these last 200,000 years that we have been on Earth as a human. Everything this 4.5 billion years that's been going on previous to us is all put in place for us to live the happy, productive, wonderful, technical life that we live now. And what the dinosaurs did for us, that they produced all the organic material that we see in the earth. And that includes the plants. The plants were there for the dinosaurs, and the dinosaurs were there to eat the plants. They kind of go somehow. But from that, we get coal, and from that, we get oil and gas, and we get diamonds. Well, what does all that do for us? We would not know this world today as we know it if it hadn't been for the dinosaurs and what they produced. Now, I will tell you, most of the hydrocarbons that we have, oil and gas and coal, a lot of things that you read, pictures you see, illustrations, have you believe that that all came from dinosaurs. But can you imagine how many dinosaurs would have had to live to produce that much oil and gas? Most of the hydrocarbons or the carbon that we see is from the plants that were here. It was so thick vegetation, y'all. It's almost, just almost humanly unbelievable how thick the vegetation was during this time. But it was on a band along the equator, and so they just ate themselves silly. You know what I mean? And they flourished and they grew and they just almost got out of control, so to speak. They were just thicker than thieves towards the end of their demise. But they were here so that we could have oil and gas and coal. What do we use coal for? It generates electricity and the heat that we need. The oil and gas, we all know what that makes. And along with the energy that it uses to produce our cars, what about all the steel? We couldn't melt steel. We couldn't melt the metal that we needed to build all the things we did if we didn't have oil and gas, because that's what heats it. You can't do that with coal. You can't do that burning wood. You got to have oil and gas. So then along with that, you have plastics. Where would our life be without plastics? It comes from oil and gas, no other source. And God knew this. And that's why he put the dinosaurs here, to generate all this organic material for us, and it to be buried and generated to a point of hydrocarbons that we can use as coal, oil and gas, etc. By the time we came into existence, there was enough maturity in what had been deposited and buried underneath the ground for it to develop into oil and gas by the time the human got here. It's all part of his great big plan, all through all of that. Diamonds.
That's what I want to get at. is-
Diamonds, just let me say this, diamonds, you know what, it's not just for your finger, but we use diamonds to cut everything. There's so many things that we couldn't do if we didn't have diamonds, and it's not the big jewelry diamonds we're talking about. We're talking about the cutting diamonds that are ugly, but they are so hard, they cut through everything. And the industrial diamonds, I guess is the word. And they even have diamond powder, that they use as an abrasive. So we could not exist on this earth as we know it without the oil and gas and the diamonds and the coal, and it was all done because of the dinosaurs. And that's why we're here. Troy.
Okay, let's talk about depths.
Depths, okay?
So, going back to Mississippi, around here is 5,000 feet, something like that. So, in theory, there were plants and animals. I don't understand how did they get down there unless there used to be a shoreline?
Oh gosh, man, you're going back into some major geology there
That's-
too.
Yeah, there you
I don't know if I can explain that simply.
go. Well, I mean,
How did they get that deep in the earth?
like at one time, say 5,000 feet, and just bear with me with this example, a dinosaur died 5,000 feet.
If you down on the surface, how did you get to 5,000?
How did he get buried?
No, I'm saying the surface at one time was 5,000 feet, right?
No.
Okay, well, how did he get down there? How did that
I mean,
how did that
maybe I don't
pocket
understand what you mean by
mark-
the surface at 5,000.
So like,
Okay,
if your dinosaur, I mean, if your dog dies right now, he's right here on the dirt.
Yes.
So if the dinosaur died, and then now you've got 5,000 feet of earth above him, how'd the earth get there? How'd the dirt get there?
Well,
Is that what
that's a
you're getting
great
at?
great question, and there's about 10 answers to that.
But you think about the Roman cities, or even any ancient city that they've had to excavate. They've had to go down,
Yes.
100, 200, 300 feet, and dirt just happens. Dirt happens.
Dirt happens. Erosion happens. Well, okay, let's see if I can make this real simple. Let's say we have a dead dinosaur laying out here in the parking lot. And, well, first of all, the first thing you have to do is you have to have something that covers up that animal to preserve it. So there has to be a flood or a major dust storm, something cataclysmic, so to speak, that would cover it up before it can rot. Maybe it falls in a river or a creek bed. And as soon as it's covered up with mud or whatever, then oxygen can't get to it, it can't decay. So it preserves itself. We know that every year the whole earth as a whole is covered by, and I'm going to miss this, so don't hold me to it exactly, but it's like a quarter to a half an inch of dirt every year that just rains in from the atmosphere, that goes through our atmosphere, that we get from the universe up in the heavens, that rains down on earth, that comes through our atmosphere, that lands on earth. Every year we get, I think it's a quarter to a half an inch. When you multiply that out over millions of years, how many half inches are you going to take to cover something up?
why are more areas acceptable to hydrocarbons? And why is there no drilling in Florida?
There is drilling in
On the
Florida.
surface?
There is.
There is?
There
Okay.
is.
Compared to Texas. I'm saying is,
Just different environments.
It's a native grassland.
Florida
There's a lot
land
more.
is like really sandy, isn't it? And it has a lot of air pockets underneath and
Yeah,
a lot of
Native.
see, but you can't compare what we're finding underneath the ground to what you see today because it's completely different. The land masses have moved. Florida was more of a desolate.
I just use that as an example. I mean, say Washington State. I
Well, Texas, where we find a lot of our oil and gas was all underneath what was a shallow ocean. The Caddo, the Mississippi, the conglomerates, those were all deposited in an ocean environment.
Where we're at with an ocean.
Yes, this was an ocean at one time. Yes. We were covered in the ocean. And that's why you have Mississippi reefs. The reefs grew in the shallow ocean setting.
So the only dinosaurs that we can find in the fossil record had to have had something happen to them as a preservative. They couldn't have just fallen over on the earth and then they would have laid there and rotted.
Yeah, exactly.
And so something had to happen to preserve the few that we've found.
Right. And there's we're just getting to see such a small snapshot of what actually happened. You know, because like I said, those dinosaurs had to die in a certain way and be buried a certain way under the certain conditions to preserve themselves. Otherwise, just like if your dog died and laid out here in the parking lot in about 2 or 3 weeks, it's gone. And it's the same way for the dinosaurs and stuff like that. So, you know, where we find dinosaurs is where ancient creeks were, in the water, type things, where there might have been floods, where there were major dust storms,
Or
avalanches.
what was the end of the dinosaurs? Was that a big
That's
preservative?
a whole nother subject that we're going to get into.
Well, now wait, before you do that, you said we get about 1/4 of an inch of dirt every year.
Mm-hmm.
From the
So-
atmosphere.
From the
From
atmosphere.
space.
Yeah. So like Rome,
Yeah.
when did it collapse and when would they dig down?
400
400
AD?
years ago? There'd only
Yeah.
be 4 inches of dirt there.
Well,
But now we
Wow,
have
they're
wind
being-
and other stuff too.
I mean,
Okay,
have y'all
so
not
yeah.
have just been out here in the pasture and seen I mean, I've even noticed this, that like a piece of pipe. I've seen a piece of pipe laying out there on a place that we have over in Throckmorton that we've had for 40
Well, that's
because
because the fire ants build around the rocks.
Well, it's the same thing. I mean, just thing that happens on Earth, just slowly, you know, things blow over it and cover it. And there's a piece of pipe that I know of that's was on a place over in Throckmorton. It used to be above the ground. We just lost the lease this past 6 months. And I was leaving out the gate. I noticed you can't see but just about this much of the very top of it. Just in the 41 years, it's been covered in this much dirt.
So here's another question. Volcanoes. And I don't know when and how long the volcanic, I'm not sure if we're past that or if we're getting to that, but how much does the volcano spew up and deposit wherever it's at?
The ashes and stuff
And
in
the
different
ashes and
areas,
stuff.
locally, but not
Correct,
globally.
locally, but even said, even locally, I mean, even
Globally?
globally, they can spread some
Some ash.
not
Sure.
not big chunks.
Sure.
But I mean, you're talking about Rome. I mean, Pompeii was a huge volcanic, and there's other volcanoes in that
Yeah.
area that
That would
could've-
make sense that there would be a
could
huge
cover up
rise.
could cover up hundreds of feet worth
Mhm.
of people or whatever.
Also, in different places of the earth is subsiding in places. All the time, the earth is always doing this,
Yeah.
all over. It's always trying to create equilibrium all over the sun. So when this is sinking over here, this is coming up over here. When this goes back down, this pops up back over here. And that's why we've had oceans in places we don't have oceans now. That's why we have mountains where we don't have mountains now. Like the Arbuckle Mountains up in Oklahoma. Those used to be 30,000 feet tall. They've all eroded away and everything and deposited down here in Texas into what we see as the Marble Falls conglomerate and in strong sands that we now have that we find oil and gas in. That all came from the mountains up in Oklahoma, but no longer, we don't even see them anymore. All we see is the stubs, the bottoms of them, some granite boulders and some of that, which is the base of the mountains. That's all that's left.
So all that one time, 30,000 feet,
Mhm.
and all that became Caddo, Marble Falls.
Mhm.
So somehow it's below the surface about 4,000 feet,
Mhm.
3,000 feet.
The reason being is, well, for instance, everything out of the Permian Basin used to be on surface.
Oh, this is interesting.
That they're drilling in now out there for oil and gas. But the Permian Basin subsided, and sank to create that basin at the same time the Rocky Mountains were growing. So something has to counteract everything that happens on Earth.
You're talking 10,000 feet up there now.
Yeah,
Is that Permian?
yeah. So the more that the Rockies grew up, the deeper the basin got, and the quicker that
It filled in.
it filled in. The deeper something sinks, the quicker that it's
See, I
filled
was
back,
going
back
somewhere
up
with
by
my
water.
question.
Huh?
I was going somewhere, but she's had to explain it for me. So why are some dinosaurs found at the surface and not? No, I was
It's
the
just
one-
not an area that just didn't subside. And that's,
So there
those are
had
all
to be
really,
some dinosaurs that would mummify those that didn't sink very deep and keep the oxygen off of them. They were like Egyptian dinosaurs.
Yes, that's exactly.
how about this question? Do you think man and dinosaurs lived at the same time? You know, everything you see on TV, every show, every movie that's ever been made, every cartoon you've ever seen, always has man and dinosaurs together. Did they live together? Has man ever laid his eyes on a dinosaur? No. No. And the reason is that the dinosaurs started in true dinosaurs that we speak of. Actually began in the Triassic period, as we know. It went through Jurassic, as you know, Jurassic Park, and it ended in the Carbonaceous period. The whole period only lasted like 180,000 years, but that happened 250 million years ago. Man didn't come into existence until 200,000 years ago, so there's no way man and dinosaurs could have been around at the exact same time. It's impossible. What did Moses and people of the time that the Bible was written, what would they have thought of dinosaurs? Again, you have to remember when all of this was written, and why didn't the dinosaurs get mentioned? What was their level of education? What would they have thought if they had gone out in the desert and saw a big, huge T-Rex fossil? It would have scared the fool out of them. With all those big teeth and stuff, they don't see nothing like that on Earth. You know, they're all just over there in the Middle East. The interesting thing is, I find this interesting, is like, hey, if those people are out running around like we all do, and they were more in the country, way more in the country than we are, how come they didn't stumble across dinosaurs and talk about it and have these? The reason is they didn't see any dinosaurs. When you look at the Middle East over there, there's no dinosaurs to speak of. There has never been a major dinosaur discovery anywhere really in the Middle East. There was one that was found 10 or 15 years ago in Egypt when they were digging for some of the pyramids and some of that kind of stuff. So they would not have run into dinosaur fossils. So therefore it never really came into question.
But how far deep is it?
We don't, how far deep?
How deep is the oil in Iraq and the Middle East?
1,500 to 8,000 feet. Yeah.
But it all
But they
depends
didn't,
on oil.
but they weren't drilling for oil in biblical
They're
times,
driven for water.
you know.
No,
So-
Troy's saying there's a lot of oil, so there had to be a lot of dinosaurs in
But
that
you
area.
said the dinosaurs
It's
brought
mostly
oil.
plant matter that
think.
creates the oil.
Now, wait a minute,
Okay.
now, wait a minute. I'm not saying that dinosaurs created all the oil. Y'all are getting that.
Yeah.
confused. I'm telling you, most of it was from plants.
Yeah.
So don't get to thinking that dinosaurs were everywhere and they died and that's what made all the oil and gas. It didn't. Most of the oil that we see came from the ocean environment with plankton, amoebas, algae, small fish, coral reefs. Those kind of things are the things that diatoms. Those are the things that grew that really made the majority of our oil. So we find most of that organic material in what we call shales. And y'all have heard of this, the Barnett shale that came way big here several years ago over here. It's a real black, organic, rich shale. And shale is nothing but just pulverized rock to the point that it really doesn't even have a grain anymore. It's just small flakes. And the organic material within it is mixed up with it. And then under pressure and heat, that matured to the point of oil and gas. That's a really quick thing. But don't get to thinking that, oh, oil and gas is here, so there we used to be big major dinosaurs. Not necessarily.
So does that kind of explain or answer Troy's question from a couple of minutes ago about how come in Texas, a lot of the oil's at 5,000 feet? Because that's 3,000 feet below sea level for us, right?
Hmm?
So that was an ocean floor that got covered up probably
It
with
was.
the
It
plate
was.
shifting.
And most of the oil that you find in Texas was from ocean deposits, so to speak, not necessarily land deposits. Now, there's portions of our, and we're kind of getting off subject a little bit, but there's parts of Texas, like over in East Texas, the East Texas Basin, you know, there was Spindletop and all those first oil discoveries over there with salt domes. If you go back and if you look at the time-wise, a lot of that is Jurassic. Oil is found in the Jurassic layer of rock, so to speak. So yeah, a lot of that could have been produced from actual dinosaurs and not as much from plants.
That's all pretty shallow too, right?
It's fairly shallow, but as you get further out, like in West Texas, all that oil and all that kind of stuff is found from deep water deposits and the organic material that came from the oceans. So the reason Moses and all them didn't see the dinosaurs is because there was none to see, so to speak, and they still to this day have never
So
found.
therefore, no need to mention them.
No need to mention. What good would it have done if God would have said, okay, now this is when I put the dinosaurs here. They're like, what's a dinosaur? I've never seen a dinosaur. Don't ever see one now. Don't even see evidence.
But I've
of it.
seen plants.
So why are you talking about dinosaurs? So that's why the dinosaurs weren't mentioned. There was no need for it. They wouldn't have known what you were talking about. He knew that future-wise, that we would have the technology. He knew that we would discover and find the things that, you know, that led us to the discovery of dinosaurs and be able to put the pieces together. But those people, when Genesis was written, he knew that we'd be okay, but he had to make it okay for them too. And so no mention of it to them is what they needed, because they wouldn't have understood it at all. It would have just thrown a wrench in everything in their minds, so to speak. So they're talking to the regular little guy out here that's uneducated, just farms and keeps his family with a few sheep. Can he understand Genesis? Yes, he can, and you didn't need to know about dinosaurs to do that, you see. But they did exist, and we did need them bad.
So are you gonna explain why they went away?
Not yet.
not
but we
today.
will.
Not today?
Not today. Is it time? It's
Yeah, it's time.
Um,
Past time.
Yeah, I guess that's about it and that was pretty much the end of the third day, right there. So just to recap that real quick, we got the lichen and stuff. We moved on to ferns, but then we moved on to big trees. We know the trees we're in continual sunlight because we don't have growth rings. We start seeing small dinosaurs, and the earth starts breaking up. And then as we get into the fourth day, which we're going to start talking about tomorrow, we get into seasons, we get into night and day, we get into seasons and the development of all that, and how that sets up everything for the animals that we start to see that are common to us that they would have understood at that time. Okay? So that's where we'll pick up next.